Election Day isn't until November 5th, but most Americans can cast their vote for president before then if they want to. Nearly 97% of Americans live in states that allow early voting. The practice is now available in 47 states.
There's been some form of absentee voting available to voters since the founding of the Republic, and early voting and mail voting have been around in some form for more than 100 years.
There are two types of early voting. Citizens can vote in person at designated early voting sites, or they can cast their vote through the mail with a mail-in ballot.
So that they don't have to vote by standing in line on voting day. They can do it from the comfort of their home. It's very convenient to just drop it in the mail.
When does early voting start? Up to 50 days before an election, or as late as the Friday before Election Day, depending on the state. On average, early in-person voting starts 27 days before the election and ends a few days before Election Day. The early voting period lasts anywhere from 3 to 46 days, again, depending on the state. The average is 20 days.
And I chose to come vote early because, one, I'm going to be out of town. Two, never know what's going to happen between there and then. They can prohibit from going their lines, technical issues. So just get out and vote, knock it out, and just move on to the next thing.
Americans embraced early voting in 2020 during the last presidential election, which occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just 27% of people reported voting for president in person on Election Day. Another 27% said they voted in person before then, while 46% say they voted by absentee or mail-in ballot. This year, 40% of registered voters said they plan to vote before Election Day.
I think life gets really busy, and this was a very big priority in my life, and also being able to vote early helps me kind of push others to vote early as well.
Which political party benefits the most from early voting? In 2020, 62% of people who voted for Republican Donald Trump voted before Election Day, while 82% of Democrat Joe Biden supporters voted early. For 2024, 46% of Democrats and 31% of Republicans said they plan to vote before November 5th. But even if the voting starts early, that doesn't mean the counting does. In some states, like the battleground state of Wisconsin, the early ballots cannot be counted until in-person voting starts on Election Day.
It is a challenge, but it's also our law. And so a lot of times the law isn't necessarily what meets our modern processes, but that it's still a law that we must follow.
But in the swing state of Arizona, where more than 75% of people vote early, votes can be counted almost as soon as they come in.
I think over 75% of Arizona voters choose to vote that way.
Actually, about 3 weeks of early voting in our state, and we can start counting those early ballots right after early voting, right? So early voting starts, they can start counting them.
There are 7 battleground states that could ultimately determine the winner of the 2024 presidential race. Only 2 of those swing states, Arizona and Nevada, can start counting the early votes before Election Day.
Those first results we release after 8 o'clock, that's all the early ballots that they've really had sent in.
The other 5 battleground states, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, must wait until after the polls open on November 5th before they can start tallying the early ballots. That later start could potentially delay determining the outcome of the presidential election.
At the local level, at the polling place level, they have to make sure that they're adjusting their processes to be able to meet the letter of the law. So that might mean hiring more poll workers. That might mean having split shifts so that they have groups of people that come in that are refreshed to be able to carry out the process.
The 3 U.S. states that technically don't allow early voting are Alabama, Mississippi, and New Hampshire. But they do offer absentee ballots for people who can't vote in person for a specified reason, like being out of town on Election Day. Everyone else in those states is expected to vote the old-fashioned way, by showing up to cast their ballots on November 5th.